The morning of my wedding should have been the happiest day of my life. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the bridal suite as my bridesmaids rushed around fixing dresses, arranging flowers, and laughing over old memories. Everyone seemed excited except me. Deep down, I carried a familiar ache that had followed me since childhood. My parents had never hidden the fact that my younger brother, Jason, was their favorite. When Jason brought home average grades, they celebrated him. When I earned top marks, they barely noticed. When he quit jobs, they excused him. When I worked overtime to pay my own college tuition, they called it what any responsible person should do. No matter what I achieved, I always seemed to disappoint them. The only person who ever made me feel truly valued was my grandfather. Grandpa Henry had been my biggest supporter for as long as I could remember. He attended every school play, every graduation, and every important milestone in my life. While my parents criticized my choices, Grandpa encouraged me to chase my dreams. "You've got a good heart, Emma," he often said. "Never let anyone convince you otherwise." Those words had carried me through some of the darkest moments of my life. Just before the ceremony began, a soft knock sounded on the bridal suite door. When I opened it, I found Grandpa standing there. At 82, his back was slightly bent and his silver hair had thinned considerably, but his warm smile remained unchanged. "Grandpa," I wrapped my arms around him carefully. He hugged me tightly. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," he said, his eyes glistening with emotion. "Thank you." For a moment neither of us spoke. Then he reached into the pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small wooden box along with a sealed envelope. The box was simple and worn, almost ordinary. "This is my wedding gift to you," he said quietly. I smiled. "Grandpa, you didn't have to." "Yes, I did." His voice carried unusual seriousness. He placed the box and envelope into my hands. "Promise me something." "What is it?" "Don't let anyone take these from you. Open them when you're alone." His words caught me off guard. Before I could ask what he meant, the door swung open. My mother entered. Behind her stood my father and Jason. "Oh, there you are," my mother said. Then her eyes landed on the box. "What's that?" Grandpa's smile faded. "It's a gift for Emma." My father immediately stepped forward. "Let's see it." I instinctively pulled the box closer. "It's okay, Dad. I'll open it later." "Nonsense," my mother replied. "We're family." Without warning, she grabbed the box from my hands. "Mom," Jason laughed. "Looks like Grandpa's passing down another antique." My father took the box and examined it with a frown. "Doesn't look like much." Grandpa's face tightened. "I gave it to Emma." "Which means it concerns the family," my mother snapped. The room suddenly felt colder. I could see the hurt in Grandpa's eyes. "Please give it back," I said. My mother folded her arms. "You've always been terrible with money." I stared at her. "What?" "Let's be honest," she continued. "You're emotional and naive. If there's anything valuable in here, your father and I should look after it." The words stung more than I wanted to admit. Even on my wedding day, she found a way to make me feel small. Grandpa stepped forward. "It belongs to Emma." Jason rolled his eyes. "Why are we acting like she's inherited a fortune?" My father chuckled. "Because Dad likes spoiling her." The room fell silent. Then my mother delivered the words that shattered what little happiness remained. "Honestly, Emma has always been the least successful member of this family. She should be grateful we're willing to help manage anything important." I felt as though she'd slapped me. My bridesmaids exchanged uncomfortable glances. Nobody knew what to say. The worst part wasn't the insult. It was how casually she said it, as though calling me worthless was simply stating a fact. Grandpa looked heartbroken. For the first time in my life, I saw anger flash across his face. One day, he said quietly, "You'll regret treating her this way." My parents laughed. Neither of them took his warning seriously. My mother tucked the envelope into her purse and handed the box to my father. "We'll keep these safe." I wanted to argue. I wanted to scream. But my wedding ceremony was only minutes away, and dozens of guests were waiting. So I stood there in my white dress, watching the only person who truly believed in me look utterly defeated. As Grandpa turned toward the door, he glanced back at me. There was sadness in his eyes, but there was something else too. A secret! And for a brief moment, I had the strange feeling that my parents had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. 3 weeks after the wedding, I finally gathered the courage to ask my parents about Grandpa's gift. The honeymoon was over, and my husband, Daniel, had noticed something was bothering me. "You haven't stopped thinking about that box, have you?" he asked one evening. I shook my head. "No." "Then call them." I knew he was right. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house. As I stood on their front porch, a knot formed in my stomach. Every visit felt like stepping back into the role of the unwanted daughter. My mother opened the door. "Oh, it's you." Not exactly a warm welcome. "I came to get Grandpa's wedding gift." Her expression immediately hardened. "What gift?" "The wooden box and envelope." She sighed dramatically. "Emma, are you seriously still thinking about that? It belonged to Grandpa." My father appeared from the living room. "We already checked it." I frowned. "What do you mean you checked it? There wasn't anything important." My heart sank. "You opened it?" My mother crossed her arms. "Of course we did." "You had no right." "Don't be so dramatic." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Then give it back." My parents exchanged a quick glance. That single look told me everything. They no longer had it. "Where is it?" I asked. My father shrugged. "Probably thrown away." The words hit me like a punch. Thrown away. It was junk. I stared at them in disbelief. That box had been the last meaningful gift Grandpa ever gave me, and they had simply discarded it. For the first time in years, I felt genuine anger. "You had no right to do that." My mother's voice sharpened. "Stop acting like a victim." I turned and walked out before I said something I would regret. The entire drive home, I fought back tears. Daniel listened quietly as I told him everything. "They threw it away." I whispered. "I don't believe that," he said. "What do you mean? They looked guilty, didn't they?" I thought about the glance my parents had exchanged. He was right. They were hiding something. 2 days later, my phone rang at 6 in the morning. The call changed everything. It was my Aunt Linda. She was crying. "Emma, it's Grandpa." My stomach dropped. "What happened?" "He passed away during the night." For several seconds, I couldn't breathe. The world seemed to stop moving. Grandpa was gone. The one person who had always believed in me was gone forever. The funeral took place 4 days later. Hundreds of people attended. As story after story was shared about Grandpa's kindness and generosity, I struggled to hold myself together. After the service, an elderly man approached me. He introduced himself as Mr. Reynolds, Grandpa's longtime attorney. "Your grandfather wanted you to have something." He handed me a small envelope. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a note written in Grandpa's familiar handwriting. "Emma, if you're reading this, I wasn't able to explain everything myself. I tried calling several times. Please visit First National Trust Bank. Ask for the file under my name. You'll understand. Love always, Grandpa." I read the note 3 times. My heart raced. A bank, a file. Suddenly, the missing wedding gift didn't seem so ordinary anymore. The next morning, I drove straight to First National Trust Bank. The building stood in the center of downtown, larger and more impressive than I expected. Inside, a receptionist greeted me politely. I explained the situation and showed Grandpa's note. Within minutes, I was escorted to a private office. A middle-aged bank employee named Sarah entered carrying a thick folder. She smiled politely. Your grandfather spoke very highly of you. Emotion tightened my throat. He did, constantly. She placed the folder on the desk, then she opened it. At first, her expression remained professional, but as she began reading the contents, the color slowly drained from her face. Her eyes widened. She looked back at the documents, then at me, then back at the documents again. The room suddenly felt unnaturally quiet. Is something wrong? I asked. Sarah swallowed hard. For several long seconds she couldn't speak. When she finally did, her voice was barely above a whisper. Miss Parker. She stared at me as though she'd just seen a ghost. I think you need to sit down. My pulse pounded in my ears. What is it? Sarah turned another page. Her hands were visibly shaking now. Then she looked directly into my eyes. And what she said next would expose a secret my parents had spent years trying to bury. My heart pounded so hard I could barely hear myself breathe. Sarah stared at the documents in front of her as if they contained something impossible. What is it? I asked again. She took a slow breath and carefully closed the folder. Miss Parker, before I explain, I need to verify your identity. I handed over my driver's license. Sarah compared it with several documents inside the file before finally nodding. There's no mistake. The nervousness in her voice made my stomach twist. No mistake about what? She opened the folder again and slid a document across the desk. At the top was my grandfather's name. Below it was something that made my eyes widen. The Henry Parker Family Trust. I stared at the numbers printed on the page. Surely I was reading them wrong. There were too many zeros, far too many. Sarah, my voice trembled. Is this real? She nodded. Very real. I looked again. The trust contained savings accounts, investment portfolios, company shares, and several properties Grandpa had quietly accumulated over decades. The total value was worth millions. My hands began shaking. Grandpa had never lived like a wealthy man. He drove an old truck. He wore simple clothes. He lived in the same modest house for 40 years. No one in the family had any idea he possessed this kind of wealth. Why would he hide this? I whispered. Sarah turned another page. Because he didn't trust certain members of your family. A chill ran through me. She handed me a sealed letter. The envelope had my name written across the front in Grandpa's handwriting. Tears immediately filled my eyes. With trembling fingers, I opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, then I'm no longer here to protect you myself. There are things you deserve to know. For years, I watched how your parents treated you. I watched them praise Jason while criticizing you. I watched them dismiss your achievements and ignore your sacrifices. And I watched you continue loving them despite everything. You reminded me of your grandmother, kind, patient, strong. Your parents believe success is measured by money and status. I learned long ago that character matters far more. That is why everything I built belongs to you, not because you're my granddaughter. Because you've earned it. Unfortunately, I suspected your parents might try to interfere. That is why I created protections. If anyone attempts to seize, open, hide, or claim your inheritance without permission, they automatically lose any right to challenge this trust in court. I have also documented every warning I gave them. The truth will come out. Never forget this. You were never worthless. The people who called you that simply failed to see your worth. Love always, Grandpa. By the time I finished reading, tears were streaming down my face. For years I had questioned myself, wondered if maybe my parents were right. Maybe I wasn't good enough. Maybe I wasn't successful enough. Maybe I wasn't enough. But Grandpa had seen me, the real me. Sarah waited quietly before speaking. There's more. I wiped my eyes. What else? She opened another section of the file. Several documents were attached. Legal statements, witness declarations, even copies of letters Grandpa had sent. He expected trouble. Sarah explained. He documented everything. As I reviewed the papers, a disturbing picture began to emerge. Grandpa had repeatedly warned my parents not to interfere with his estate plans. He had even written specific instructions regarding the wedding gift. Then Sarah showed me the final piece. A security report. The wooden box my parents had taken wasn't just a gift. It contained access documents connected to the trust. Grandpa had intended to personally explain everything after the wedding. My parents had stolen the documents before he had the chance. Sarah looked uncomfortable. There's another issue. My stomach tightened. What issue? She slid forward a recent transaction report. Several withdrawals had been attempted using information connected to the contents of the box. My blood ran cold. The names on the requests were unmistakable. Richard Parker, Susan Parker, my father, my mother. For weeks, they hadn't simply hidden Grandpa's gift. They had tried to access what they believed was their inheritance. A wave of anger surged through me. All those years of criticism, all those years of being called selfish, irresponsible, and worthless. Yet the moment they smelled money, they tried to take what wasn't theirs. Sarah folded her hands. Miss Parker, our legal department has already reviewed the situation. I looked up. What happens now? For the first time since entering the office, Sarah smiled. Now, she paused. Now your parents are about to learn that your grandfather planned for everything. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one who felt powerless. For years, my parents had controlled every room they walked into. They controlled conversations. They controlled family gatherings. They controlled the narrative of who I was. According to them, I was the disappointing daughter who would never measure up to their expectations. But sitting in the bank's conference room 1 week later, I watched that illusion begin to crumble. Across the table sat my parents, their attorney, Sarah, and 2 lawyers representing Grandpa's trust. Neither Mom nor Dad looked worried when they arrived. In fact, they looked confident, almost smug. My mother barely acknowledged me. My father leaned back in his chair as if the entire meeting was a waste of his valuable time. Then one of the trust attorneys began presenting the evidence. The confidence disappeared quickly. First came Grandpa's letters, then came witness statements, then security records. Then copies of warnings Grandpa had given them over the years. Every document painted the same picture. Grandpa had repeatedly instructed them not to interfere with my inheritance, and they had ignored him every single time. The final blow came when the attorney revealed records showing my parents had attempted to access trust-related assets using information from the stolen wedding gift. The room fell silent. My father's face turned pale. My mother's hands began trembling. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "We were protecting family property." "No," the attorney replied calmly. "You were attempting to take property that never belonged to you." For the first time, neither of them had an answer. The legal consequences arrived quickly. Because of the clauses Grandpa had carefully built into the trust, my parents lost every opportunity to challenge his wishes. They were ordered to return every dollar connected to the unauthorized attempts. They were also required to cover significant legal expenses. The money itself wasn't what mattered most to me. The truth was, and soon everyone learned it. Word spread throughout the family faster than I expected. Relatives who had spent years believing my parents' version of events suddenly discovered a very different story. People learned how Grandpa had defended me. They learned about the wedding gift. They learned about the inheritance. Most importantly, they learned how my parents had treated me for years. The phone calls started almost immediately. Aunts, uncles, cousins, many apologized for not seeing what was happening sooner. Some admitted they had always suspected favoritism, but never realized how severe it was. The biggest surprise came from Jason, the golden child, the favorite son, the center of my parents' universe. When he realized there would be no fortune waiting for him, he quietly disappeared. The son they had spent decades prioritizing suddenly stopped answering their calls. In the end, even he abandoned them. The irony was impossible to ignore. Months passed. Life slowly became peaceful. With Grandpa's inheritance, Daniel and I purchased a beautiful home. Not a mansion, not something flashy, just a place filled with warmth, laughter, and security, the kind of home Grandpa would have loved. I also fulfilled another dream. Using part of the trust, I created a scholarship fund in Grandpa's name. Every year, students facing financial hardship would receive help pursuing their education. It felt like the perfect way to honor the man who had always believed in giving people opportunities. One autumn afternoon, nearly a year after Grandpa's passing, our extended family gathered for a reunion. For the first time in my life, I wasn't sitting quietly in a corner feeling invisible. People wanted to hear my stories. They wanted to know about the scholarship program. They wanted to talk to me, not because of the money, because they finally understood who I was. Near the end of the event, my parents approached me. They looked older, smaller somehow. The confidence that once surrounded them had vanished. My mother spoke first. We made mistakes. It wasn't a perfect apology. Not even close, but it was the closest thing I would ever receive. My father lowered his eyes. We should have treated you better. For several seconds, I simply looked at them. Years ago, I had dreamed of hearing those words. Now they felt strangely unimportant, because my happiness no longer depended on their approval. I forgive you, I said softly. Relief flashed across their faces. Then I continued, but forgiveness doesn't rebuild trust. Neither of them argued. Deep down, they knew I was right. The following morning, I visited Grandpa's grave. A gentle breeze moved through the trees as I placed fresh flowers beside the headstone. Then I unfolded the final page of his letter, the last sentence he ever wrote to me. Tears filled my eyes as I read it again. You were never worthless, Emma. You were simply surrounded by people too blind to recognize your value. For years, I had searched for proof that I mattered. In the end, Grandpa had left me something far more valuable than money. He gave me the truth, and that truth set me free.